So if you're looking for a pair of sunglasses that helps you stay out on the water longer, I recommend Costas. They have incredible technology that helps cut through the glare of the sun and basically keeps your eyes from being exhausted from trying to squint the whole time. And the company was founded over 35 years ago by fishermen who wanted to stay out on the water longer. So they know what they're doing. We don't love talking about gear on this show, but once you try quality, it's very hard to go back. And Costas are quality sunglasses. You can find out more about them at costassunglasses.com. That is also in the show notes. So if you're looking for the right pair of sunglasses for your sport on the water or off the water, because they're not just for fishermen anymore. They work for all sorts of sports. Use Costa so you can see what's out there.
There's all this creaking, groaning, and cracking going on all the time. Even there was days when I was walking along and there's like little fissure cracks shooting out of my feet. So it was quite unnerving to begin with.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, where we talk to athletes, adventurers, and business owners from around the world of adventure sports. Whether you're climbing Mount Everest, starting a bike shop, or getting up off your couch to take your kids hiking for the first time, we want you to have the motivation and inspiration you need to chase that next adventure. The Adventure Sports Podcast is brought to you by Camp Crate, the leaders in fully planned self-guided backpacking adventures, as well as backpacking gear rental. You can check them out at campcrate.net. Hey folks, so today's Throwback Thursday episode is with Gavin Hennigan. He's an adventurer. He's been on the show before, but this one goes back a couple years where Gavin traversed Lake Baikal in Russia, which is a freshwater lake. It's the biggest and deepest in the world. It holds 20% of the world's freshwater, and it is freezing cold there. And he was able to haul a sled 700 kilometers along the shoreline from south to north, completing the journey in 17 days. He's rowed across the Atlantic. He's done a lot, and you can look up his name on our episode archive and see what other things he's done. But great guy, great interview done by Travis, and he's just a true adventurer. Had a pretty rough life starting out, but cleaned up his life and uses adventure to stay clean from a former drug addiction, which is awesome. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into it, and I'll tell you about our sponsors. Today's sponsors are Athletic Brewing, which are also the funders of the Adventure Sports Adventure Grant. First one ever. Maybe you can go out there and do something like this one day, and we want to help pay for it. We're giving away $1,000. Apply on our website, links in the show notes. But Athletic Brewing makes incredible non-alcoholic craft beer, amazing stuff. It helps a lot of people achieve all sorts of goals, whether that's health or addiction-wise or just a good tasting beer without the effect of alcohol. Sometimes I just enjoy that, Also, Aftershok's headphones that don't go in your ears, but go against your head so you don't have your ears plugged up with something so you can hear the things around you. Really awesome idea, and they work really well. They're waterproof, Bluetooth connected, so they're wireless. They stay out of your way, stay on your head, whether you're biking or you could be surfing and listening to this podcast. How freaking cool is that? All right, then CS Instant Coffee. They are the makers of 100% Arabica coffee in compostable packaging, little one servings, so you can take them with you in the woods, take them hiking, biking, whatever. And it's really good stuff. And all those have varying levels of discounts for our listeners, and all that is in the show notes. So check out the show notes, follow the links, and you can get a deal. All right, let's get into this thing.
Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Adventure Sports Podcast. This is your host, Travis. So I got a great show for you today. Gavin Hennigan contacted me to tell me a few things about the things he's done in his life. And I've got to say, this guy is Mr. Adventure on my list. I mean, of all the people we've talked to, we've got some pretty cool adventure sports out there and interviews and amazing stories. But Gavin runs the gamut of adventure. And just to give you a little bit of a background, and I'll let Gavin fill you in. The guy is a deep sea diver by day. That's his day job. So for most people, that would be enough of an adventure in and of itself. But when Gavin gets time off, you can find him, at the tops of mountains, climbing, skiing, snowboarding, hiking, or walking Lake Baikal and Siberia. There, ultra marathons in the Arctic. This guy is doing everything out there. So we're going to dig into Gavin's life and his history of adventure a little bit, and hopefully we'll be entertained here. So Gavin, welcome to the show.
How's it going, Travis? Hello from Galway in the west of Ireland.
Well, it's good to talk to you, man. I'm really glad to have you on, and I'm excited to dig into all these cool things that you've been doing. I got to be honest, I got a little bit lost in your Instagram page when you directed me to it, because there's all these photos of everything you're out doing, and I'm not even sure when you stop to rest, because it seems like you're always out there. So, let's talk about the diving stuff. How did you get involved in diving in the beginning, and why deep sea diving? Tell us a little bit about that, and honestly, I'm curious to know what the day in the life of a deep sea diver is like.
Yeah, so I got into diving in Australia. Actually, I went out to Australia when I was 21. A lot of young Irish people would go out there on a working holiday visa, and I was out there just working on the building sites, and I'd heard about this course, commercial diving, and I didn't really know too much about it at the time, but it really sparked my interest. I'd been surfing and kind of grew up on the west coast of Ireland here by the ocean, so kind of had a lot of that sort of background, and it just really interests me. So I got a big loan out and went for this course, and it was actually around the time of Hurricane Katrina in the Gulf of Mexico, over 10 years ago. And when I came out of school, dive school, there was kind of a bit of a boom in the industry. So I kind of lucked out and fell straight into work. And it didn't take me long to head offshore, working on the rigs around Southeast Asia from there, So it was kind of all happened very quickly, but I sort of took to it quite well. And then, started working up in the oil fields in Asia, doing construction on the oil platforms,
So you do a lot of maintenance and construction, and you're down in the depths. I mean, this is not normal construction work. Obviously, you have a lot of variations in your environment that you have to deal with and train for. What's that like being down there, and what kind of depths are we talking about?
Yeah, so initially it started off as like what's called an air diver. It's just you dive, say, off the side of a boat or a barge, and you go down for a couple of hours and you come back up, but after a couple of years of that, I qualified, got enough hours up to do what's called saturation diving, and that's kind of where the big bucks is at, and that's also the more extreme side of things, because you can dive. It's a technique to dive a lot deeper. So what we do is we were put inside a diving saturation chamber, which is inside a boat, and we are pressurized inside this pressure vessel for 28 days, and it's our living environment, and then we transfer into what's called a diving bell, and that takes us to the bottom, down to up to 200 meters, sort of 600 foot in depth, and then we come out of the diving bell, go to work on the bottom for sort of 6 hours at a time, and then come back into the diving bell, which takes us back inside the ship, and then we go back into the chamber, and that's our little living space. And there could be 3 or 6 guys at a time living in there, and then there's maybe 12 guys altogether. There's 3 in each team, and it's just sort of round the clock diving. So you just day in, day out, you spend your time living in this very small space. It's basically like living in your bathroom with two other blokes, or 5 other blokes, and you just spend your whole time there. And then at the very end, say after about 3 weeks of day-to-day diving, you stay in there, or else you move into another chamber, and then you do your decompression, which is the process of getting back to normal atmospheric pressure, and that takes anything up to a week, to return to the surface. So it's it's a bit different than a normal 9 to 5 job. We're breathing a completely different gas mixture. It's a different atmosphere altogether than the atmosphere that we're in right now. We're breathing anything up to 98% helium, actually, because nitrogen is narcotic at depth. So when you breathe, if you were to breathe normal air, which is 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, if you were to breathe that anything beyond 50 meters, it's completely toxic and narcotic, and you can't do that. So what we do is we use helium instead, and that's an inert gas also, but it has no narcotic effect. So the only difference is that you speak like a chipmunk all the time. So we sound like Donald Duck and the Chipmunks when we're down there, Yeah,
that would be worthy of a few recordings.
Yeah, it's absolutely hilarious for the first time you do it, but it actually wears pretty thin after a while, because the deeper you go, the harder it is to understand people, because you're breathing a higher and higher percentage of helium. So yeah, like I said, I think when we're down at around, if we're entering around 150, 175 meters deeper than that, it's about 98% helium. So actually, when you first go in, you've trouble understanding the other guys you're in with, and then the people speaking to you on the surface, they actually have to have an unscrambler, So the supervisors and the life support technicians, they have to have an unscrambler to be able to understand what we're saying,
Wow, I had no idea. So, I mean, it's obviously not the safest environment to be in. So to be able to communicate with your fellow divers and the surface is highly important, So
Yeah.
The fact that they have scramblers to make out what you guys are actually saying, because your voices are so different, I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, so we have a full team of what's called life support technicians, and their job basically is to monitor our living environment. So our gas mixtures are hugely important, what we're breathing. And our decompression schedules are massively important, because we don't want to be getting the bends and coming up too quickly. The bends is the main danger with diving. When sort of you fizz up, as we say, if you look at say when you have a glass of champagne and you pour a glass of champagne, you see those bubbles appearing on the side of the glass. It's essentially the same thing that's happening with our bodies when we decompress. We've got compressed gas like you would in a bottle of champagne or a bottle of Coke, and then as we come up, that is coming out of solution, that gas, so it's slowly diffusing through our tissues and coming out through our lungs. So if we were to come up too quickly, those bubbles would appear quicker in our vessels, and it would cause us to get the bends, so that's obviously a big danger for us. So we have a full team there monitoring us sort of 24/7. We've kind of got cameras on us while we're in the chambers, and then we've got the sort of diving side of it. Then we've got a supervisor that speaks to us while we're diving, and yeah, it's a full complement, full team on the ship. There could be 100 people on each diving support vessel there to sort of facilitate us getting in the water and doing the job,
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
So what are some of the coolest and some of the scariest things you've experienced down there at those depths?
Yeah, I've worked many places. I've been pretty much all over the world with it. Worked a lot in Southeast Asia, like I mentioned, up all over West Africa and Nigeria and Congo, Equatorial Guinea. So I've been to all over the Middle East, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Caspian Sea, and Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan. So I've been to some pretty wild places. So I've definitely a few stories from traveling to those places. I suppose one of the ones that springs to mind is working in Kuwait. Working out in the Middle East and these places, West Africa. It's there isn't a hell of a lot of safety there. It's pretty sort of cowboy style. Working and like working in the North Sea and other places like that. There's a lot more safety. And I was working in Kuwait this one time, and I was working for this kind of construction company, and I was in my early days of saturation diving, and you kind of take any work you can get, and this particular company wouldn't be the best record for safety, but they always took on like the biggest, heaviest construction jobs, and it was always a good place to go and sort of get the experience that you need to do sort of like heavy construction, which is sort of, doing, big pipeline hookups, and stuff like that. Sort of, it's basically like underwater industrial pipe fitting what we're doing, So we were working on these big sort of 50-inch, 60-inch lines, and this particular job was shallow water, but it was the middle of summer. It was like August in Kuwait, and it was very, very hot, So we were actually only maybe 25, 30 meters in depth, but it was so hot. Like the water was like bath water. So we were going down in the diving bell, and we were absolutely boiling. We were taking down like bottles of frozen water, but into the diving bell with us, and they would just thaw out in like half an hour. So it was just so hot. But then on top of that, we were working on a manifold on the bottom, which is like a sort of junction of pipelines, and there had been a leak on there, and there was a huge amount of kind of crude oil just like kind of stuck all over this manifold, and we had to get in, and first we had to clean it off to take out a section, and it just ended up getting all over our umbilicals, because we've got a hose that comes from the bell, and that has our communication lines and our gas lines, and so we're getting this crude oil all over us. And we were coming back to the diving bell, like there was two divers at the time, me and another guy, and we were swapping out, and we didn't realize at the time, but we were getting a bit high from these fumes from the crude oil. So at one stage I came back, and the other diver was kind of like almost nearly flaked out, like lying inside the bell. Like had to kind of rouse him, because there was all this crude oil, and the fumes from it were literally toxic, and he was literally nearly passed out, So it was a pretty hectic sort of scenario, and we had to get in and make sure we clean all our lines before we got back in the bell, because it was a really dangerous situation, But this is again working out there, the stuff like that happens. And then after that, then we had to get in and into this manifold, and after we'd sort of half cleaned it, we had to burn holes in this piece that we had to lift out, and there was still like bits of oil on this manifold, and there was actually at one stage I remember turning around and seeing we were using these sort of oxy-arc burning rods, and I remember looking across and seeing this little globule of oil that had caught fire underwater, and it was floating away a little ball of oil on fire, So it only lasted like a half a second, but that was probably one of the craziest things I've seen,
You don't get too many opportunities to see something like that. That's pretty neat.
Yeah. So,
what about a scary time?
Scary time, I suppose. Yeah, just working in. I think probably some of the earlier diving that I'd done when I was air diving, before the saturation. I was working in India, and we were air diving at the time now, and we were diving down to like 50 meters, and we were working and had to do a quick task. And because of like I was mentioning with the air diving, you just dive off the side of the vessel, and we were actually getting nitrogen narcosis because we were diving down to 50 meters, and then we were having to do like a quick task. But working off India, the visibility is terrible in the water. It's actually the water can look like literally like coffee sometimes, so we were going down, and we were trying to get this task done. The currents were really strong, and the visibility, there was literally none. So I remember going in and down to 50 meters, really quickly. We go down like this little basket. They lower down on the side of the boat, and then I got down onto the pipe, and I basically, the nitrogen narcosis kicked in like 100%, and I was literally, I could just imagine me holding onto this pipeline for dear life, and all I could see was stars. I was completely off my head. I've felt like I was on a lot of drugs at the time, and I just have this supervisor shouting in my ear saying, come on, get the job done, because you've literally only got 5 or 10 minutes before you have to come back up, and it just takes a while to sort of adapt to that sort of nitrogen narcosis, and I didn't really do too well that particular dive. I don't think I'd got anything done to come back out, and someone else had to do it,
Yeah, I'm sure. He's yelling at you, get the job done. You're just saying, I'm still trying to figure out where the heck I am, man. Give me a second.
Exactly, yeah.
So do you ever get into these situations, and does it ever occur to you, or do you ever think, well, maybe I'd just rather sit in a computer, in front of a computer and do a job like that for a while? Or does this type of work just drive you on a daily basis?
Well, I mean, I suppose it kind of like, just to go back a little bit further to before the diving. When I was I was in sport. I was into sport as a teenager, and I was actually a competitive swimmer, so I was kind of pretty active. But when I was about 16, I started drinking alcohol and using drugs quite heavily, and I kind of went down that path. I'm a very sort of one track mind, maybe addictive personality, you want to call it. And I got really, really stuck into that. And I spent sort of kind of 5 years, drifting around and getting in a bit of trouble with, drugs and alcohol. And I actually ended up inside a rehab treatment center. I was using a lot of heavy drugs at the time. And things weren't really, good. I had didn't do anything for 5 years apart from do that, just partying and doing drugs. And, I had to leave Ireland at one stage. I was living over in the UK, and I lived in this flat with a friend of mine. We had an apartment, kind of condo, I suppose you got to call it, but it had no furniture in it because we didn't want to spend the money on furniture. And I lived in this little 1-bedroom room, and I had a mattress thrown on the ground, and there wasn't even any curtains on the window. I had black bags taped over the window, and it was just like this little dark hole. And I was in quite a dark place myself, obviously, to go to that. And, I suppose, I had a history in my family of alcohol abuse as well. And, it was a tough time. And, I ended up coming back when I was 21 to Ireland, and then ending up, as I said, going into a rehab and kind of getting clean and, sober then, so, yeah, like I suppose that after something like that happening, I didn't really want to look back, and I want to try and make the most of the life that I have. And for me, like I was always looking for a buzz from the alcohol and drugs, and I think I found that, I found that again through the diving, and I found that through the adventure sports, which I got into kind of early on, which really saved me. I think I started surfing probably a couple of months after I got clean. We've got really good surf here in the west coast of Ireland, and I'll tell you a quick story of how I got into that. I was getting clean, and I didn't actually have a job at the time. I was on the dole here, like social support, what we call it in Ireland, and I had a friend of mine who was also getting clean, and he'd been a DJ, and he'd had his DJ equipment, and he sold it because he didn't want to be associated with the kind of party scene anymore. And he ended up, selling that, and he had a little bit of money, and he said, "Look, I want to start surfing." And I was like, "Okay, cool, I'll be into doing that, but I don't really have any money. Didn't have a job or anything." And I said, "Look, he said, I'll buy a wetsuit if you buy a board, And I saved up I saved up my dole money, and he bought the wetsuit and I bought the board, and then we took off down the coast here in Ireland to a place called Lahinch. It's like a famous kind of little surf town, and we're driving down in the car in the middle of a storm in November in Ireland, which is not the ideal weather. But anyways, we headed out surfing, and of course he went out first. He put the wetsuit on and got out the board, and I sat in the car in the wind and the rain, and then he came in and gave me the wetsuit and the board. Of course, he pissed in the wetsuit, and I had to get that on, and
Awesome.
It was funny. And then I went out, and I was out there in the middle of a storm in the west coast of Ireland in the middle of November. The water is absolutely freezing, and it just kind of, I suppose at the time, after going through what I had been through with the alcohol and the drugs, and that sort of dark place I'd been in, I just kind of, it ignited something in me, and it it tapped into like a crazy energy. I really enjoyed the rawness of, the harsh kind of winter weather in Ireland, and it just kind of, it opened up something for me. And after that, I basically became a surfer. I just was 100% into surfing, and one thing led to another with that. That's kind of one of the reasons why I ended up in Australia. And then, as soon as I found out about the diving, it just made total sense to go into that. So, for me, it was, coming back to what I was saying, it's just, I didn't want to look back in my life. I just wanted to make the most of it. And for me, it was just, life just seemed like an adventure. The diving was an adventure, and then the surfing was an adventure. And it was just, I just wanted to follow that path no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what a cool and inspiring story for you guys to both at the same time dig yourselves out of that hole that you had found yourself in. And I mean, to find adventure and get hooked on that, like you alluded to, it was having an addictive personality kind of goes hand in hand with adventure, because people can really get deep into adventure because of it. You get a little bit of thrill of doing something small, and it's like, well, let me try something a little bit, it gives me a little bit more and more and more and more. So, do you kind of feel like if you didn't have adventure and you did have that desk day job, that you would be susceptible to slipping back into the alcohol and drug dependency?
Absolutely. That was one of the main reasons I wanted to do the diving, because diving, that sort of lifestyle really appealed to me, because it was to go offshore for 2-3 months at a time, and then to have a period of time off, a month off, 2 months off. For me, doing a 9 to 5 and then just having the weekend, for most people it's okay, and it would have probably sufficed to me in a way, but I just really appealed to me to be able to go away and come back and then have a good month or two to really get stuck into, an expedition, or, go somewhere on a surf trip or a snowboarding trip or whatever it is, So that sort of, really appealed to me. And I think, absolutely, if I didn't have, these things in my life, I definitely would end up going back to that sort of alcohol and drugs for sure, because, I've no reason to do it now. Like I want to get to bed early so I can get up, and go surf or go train or do whatever it is, So it's, I think if you're having fun and you're enjoying your life, you have no reason to go back to the drugs and the alcohol, and it's, you've got this amazing connection to nature, and you feel a bit more part of the planet. Like for me, when I was, using drugs, it was a complete disconnect from everything. It was a disconnection from life, and that's what happens when you get that dependency. And now I'm connected. I'm connected to the planet when I'm out there, and I'm connected to other people that I'm, my friends and family and stuff. So it's a complete new way of life. Yeah.
Yeah, you found a way to make life, it's finally clicked. Life is finally meaningful instead of just wasting it away, and hiding in your dark apartment. That's for sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
Athletic Brewing is pioneering non-alcoholic craft beer. Yeah, I said non-alcoholic craft beer. And there's a number of reasons you might want to do that, whether you're training for an event, which a lot of our listeners are, or, if you're babysitting and don't want to be drunk in case something happens. I mean, stuff happens, but you still want to sit down and enjoy the game and have a beer. This is an incredible option for a full-flavored, full-bodied beer. Each can is only 50 to 70 calories, with IPA, golden ales, stouts, and tons of seasonal offerings. Athletic Brewing is a great option if you want that craft brewery taste, but not deal with the effects of alcohol itself. If you'd like to save 15% on your first order, go to athleticbrewing.com and use the code ADVENTURE at checkout.
So your job, I imagine, because of hazard pay and the work schedule you have, it sounds like it also affords you that magic formula of being able to take time off and get out and do some of these amazing adventures that you've done. There's a whole list. I mean, I talked about hiking Lake Baikal in Siberia. You just got back from that. You're involved in ultra marathons in the Arctic, mountaineering, splitboarding, base camping in Alaska. I mean, all kinds of stuff like that. So, share with our audience some of the things that you do partake in when you get some time off from diving.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I've always I've bounced around quite a bit between different things, and when I saw your podcast and it just kind of was adventure, it just really, I thought like this is kind of made for me, because I suppose I've never really defined myself by any one particular thing. I've surfed for a number of years. I lived in Bali, while I was diving, and I used to surf, some of the big stuff at Uluwatu, and I've been all over Indonesia and Mentawai Islands, and but then I actually got into snowboarding. I went snowboarding, through the surfing. Obviously, it's easily related, but when I got into the mountains and stuff, I just it was a whole new thing for me. We have some mountains in Ireland here, but nothing like the snow-capped, like you'd get in Colorado. And I went snowboarding this one year in the Alps, and it really opened my mind up to the possibilities of the mountains. And I just sort of went with that for a few years, and I got into splitboarding. Which is, if anyone doesn't know, it's basically like ski touring for snowboarders. So that took me into the backcountry, and I spent I think I did 2 seasons in Canada. I spent 1 season kind of in Whistler, and then another season I came back, and myself and a buddy and another friend, the 3 of us, rented an RV and travelled all over British Columbia and up into Alaska. And spent 4 months basically splitboarding nonstop, and then ended with a trip to Glacier Bay National Park, a base camp, for 2.5, just over 2 weeks, which was absolutely amazing trip. To base camp out there in the wilds of Alaska, and snowboard some of the peaks out there, which are pretty much half of them are unnamed. It was amazing. So. Yeah, that, and then that led into me going, to Antarctica on a splitboard expedition, and then also up to Svalbard in the Arctic on another splitboard expedition. And yeah, just lots of different places, Japan, Argentina, all over the Alps. And yeah, and then last year, I was feeling like I wanted to challenge myself a little bit more. I don't know why. I was reading an article online. I think it was on Red Bull. It was like the 10 hardest races in the world, and I saw this race in the Arctic. It's a 350-mile ultramarathon, and I just decided I kind of wanted to do it. I don't know where I got the idea, but it's I've never done a marathon. All of a sudden, I'm thinking
So why not try one in the Arctic?
Yeah, why not try a 10 back-to-back or something ridiculous like that. And then, I went for this crazy ultramarathon, 350 miles, last March. It's called Likey's 6633. It starts just outside the Arctic Circle. And it takes you all the way up to the Tuktoyaktuk and the banks of the Arctic Ocean in the Northwest Territories. So I entered this and trained in Ireland for like 3 months before. I had this big chunk of time off, and got totally obsessed with that and the training. I was dragging tires around the mountains in Ireland and buying all this cold weather Arctic gear, and then headed off to Canada to do this race. And they'd held it for 7 years, and I think there'd only been something like 12 finishers at the time. So it was like
wow.
Yeah, not many people have actually entered it, truth be told, but at the same time, not many people had finished it either. So it's definitely like up there with one of the sort of toughest ultramarathons, and it's very long, obviously, and the weather is a massive factor. And it's also very mentally tough because there's a lot of very, very straight roads in it. So I suppose, I savored the challenge. For me, the diving, like living inside a chamber for 28 days, like, is mentally tough. It's a challenge to, go in there. You lose a lot of your dignity. You're on camera. You're in a closed space with other guys, and there's no way you can get out. You have to decompress. Like, you can't just say I want out and you get out. You could be 7 days before you can get out of a chamber. Like people have said before, it takes less time to come back from the moon than it does to come back from the depths that we work at. And that is the truth. It's if something happens to you down there while you're diving, if you get injured, you can't just get out and go to the hospital. The most they can do is get a doctor into you and that can decompress with you. So I've kind of operated in that sort of environment that mentality, of, just being at the mercy of that, So I think, transferring that into the type of ultramarathon which was, kind of more mentally tough than physically tough. Like, if you can do 100 miles, you can do 300 miles, the distance is kind of irrelevant. It's just the amount of time you're out there, which is, anything up to, well, I think it took me 7.5 days to finish this thing, yeah, I suppose I really enjoyed it. I sort of tapped into something new again in myself, which was a way of sort of pushing myself and challenging myself, and from there, things have kind of changed again for me in my life,
Yeah, I love the link between the narcotics and alcohol and the adventure sports that you have brought up a couple of times, and then that's the mental strength that you have to have for that, because obviously for someone that's is hooked on alcohol or drugs, that really saps your mental strength, because you've essentially given in, to that addiction. But like you're saying, the ability to deal with the depths of deep sea diving, or the 7.5 days running, in such cold temperatures for 350 miles, there's a lot of mental strength that you have to summon to do either one of those, and to pull yourself away from the dependency and apply that mental strength to these things is such a really cool, inspiring story. I hope it reaches out to some people in the audience as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, it's something that people comment on a lot, and if enough people say it to me, like, I suppose I could be walking around really thinking to myself, God, I'm so amazingly strong and mentally powerful and blah blah blah. But I actually don't believe that myself, because I'm a big believer in trying to be humble, and I think, these are things that I want to do. I'm actually, I'm going out there, and I'm actually paying money to enter these things, so this is like my holiday, like, for me, like, when I think about real mental strength, I think about my mother raising 4 kids on her own, and people that are, in really, really tough situations in their life, and then I kind of bring myself back down to earth, and yeah, look, getting through alcohol and drugs was really, really tough, and I suppose, I did work really hard at it, but at the same time, I think, I had a lot of help as well, so I suppose, it is a big part of it, but I think it's a balance between having, not being too much into the ego around it, and also, thinking that, at times, like with the diving, you've no choice really. You're stuck in that chamber. You can't get away with it. And, I suppose I just don't want to tap out, I wouldn't, I wouldn't really, I just want to just go through it. And that was the same with the ultramarathon. I just said, right, well, I'm in it now. I might as well just hang in there until the end, what's the worst can happen, so, it's a funny one, I try not to think too much about it, and, just keep pushing on with a lot of the stuff that I do,
Well, you're obviously a humble guy, and I can appreciate that for sure. But you can get all the help in the world, but in the end, you're the one that truly has to do it. So, pat yourself on the back, at least a little bit. Humility and being humble is a good thing for sure, but allow it for yourself.
No, you're right. You're right. I actually, I was in, I'll, talk more about Lake Baikal as the last thing I just did. And, I actually finished it. And it actually ended up being more than I thought, because I was walking in and out of these little bays and stuff. So I ended up doing over 700 kilometers, and I got to the end, and I was sat on the sled, and, I kind of was like, there was nobody there. It was kind of like wasn't like an anticlimax, but it was just like that moment where I just finished, and I was like, wow, this is it. I finished, and I'm sitting on the sled, and I'm kind of look just over the edge of the lake, and there was kind of where there was kind of a frozen marsh where kind of like a river came in, and I thought to myself, geez, you could probably go a bit further, and I was like, hang on a minute, I've just done 706 kilometers, like 440 miles, and I was like, this is enough, and I need to just pat myself on the back here, because I think, as somebody who's come from a dark place, as a teenager, I didn't have a lot of self-worth and self-confidence, and that's kind of one of the other things, the why I ended up in the alcohol and drugs thing. It just sort of, it was an easier way for me to go at the time. So coming back from that, like I suppose I'd be very driven, so, and it's that addictive personality, like enough is never enough, but, I had to stop at that moment and say, like, 706K is enough. I don't need to like go dragging the sled any further, just stop, give myself a pat on the back. You've done well, you've achieved a massive goal, and yeah, just, as you said, pat on the back.
Yeah, accept your accomplishment and move on.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about the Lake Baikal thing. I mean, 430 miles is a long way. And put that in perspective for people in the U.S., that's 50 miles wider or longer than the width of Colorado. So you imagine going out into Siberia and dressing for the weather and the occasion and spending days upon days upon days walking on either snow or ice, and obviously camping and living in that environment for that amount of time and that amount of miles. I mean, that's a pretty crazy feat. What drove you to do that? There was some sort of record involved in this, right?
Yeah, I saw the pictures of the lake online a few years ago. It's a Lake Baikal is the deepest freshwater lake in the world. It's 1,600 meters deep at its deepest. I think it holds 20% of the world's fresh water, and it completely freezes over in winter. And, if anyone has never seen pictures of it, just Google Lake Baikal in winter, and it's just incredible because it's crystal clear water and it freezes, and it's just got this amazing looking ice, and I when I raced in the Arctic last year, I was the last third of the races on the ice roads, and it was just an amazing feeling being on the ice like that, So I really wanted to go to Baikal, and a couple of years ago there was actually a race on there called the Black Ice Race, but it was only held once. And I was kind of Googling it before and thinking, oh, hopefully it'll be on again, I can enter it. And then I was actually in Nepal last November. I was climbing Amadablam, 6,800 meters, summited that, and then I came back to Kathmandu, and I was actually going to go on. I was actually just about to go on an expedition to make an attempt on Annapurna, a winter ascent attempt on Annapurna, which didn't work out in the end because of the weather. But I actually got sick in Kathmandu, and I was got a stomach bug as you easily do, and I was lying in bed for a couple of days, and just had this sort of moment where I was like, I can go and just do this myself. It's probably not that big a deal, and just sort of at that moment just made the decision to go to Baikal the following March, and I actually was racing in the Yukon again in early February. So I was back for the Yukon Arctic Ultra, which was the beginning of February in Whitehorse. So that was 300 miles. So I was out in Nepal for 6-7 weeks in November, December. Come back to Ireland. Did a huge amount of mileage then December, January, and headed off to the Yukon to race in the Yukon Arctic Ultra, and I ended up getting second in that, and I got the third fastest time. The guy who beat me, actually an American guy, Jan Kriska, he broke the record. He just went just under 5 days, and I did 5 days in 3 hours, and that was, an incredible race. I really enjoyed that. And then I'd planned to do Baikal 3 weeks later, so literally 3 weeks later I'm on a plane on the other side of the world in like southeast Siberia to head to Baikal.
Why slow down, right?
Yeah, and people are like, what are you doing? You raced 300 miles in the Yukon, and I think I had 6 hours sleep in 5 days, and then I end up in Siberia with my sled, literally all the same gear. It's those the winter ultras. You've got your sled and all your stuff, so it's essentially the same gear. So yeah, I was head over there, and I wanted to try and beat this fastest known time by Ray Zahab and Kevin Valley. They're two Canadian adventurers and ultra runners. They did it in 13 and a half days. So I was solo and unsupported. So I was set up for solo unsupported. I had all my everything with me, all my gear, all my food for the whole crossing, and I had 6 liters of Russian petrol, 2 stoves, sort of 12 kilos of food. I think I'd about 60 kilos, over 120 pounds of gear in my sled, and set off from the south of Baikal on the 1st of March, and headed on north, and ran into trouble on the second day. Both my stoves stopped working. And
that's scary.
Yeah, yeah. I tested them pretty good, but I probably could have done it a bit more. But they were Primus Omni-fueled, and that's a note to anyone out there: that Primus Omni-fueled stoves do not work with Omni-fuel. They just work with camping gas.
Interesting. So was it a temperature issue that you were dealing with?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it was. Yeah, I think it was. There's a few joints in there, and I think it just clogged up the petrol and the Russian petrol. And I since learned in hindsight that if you're going to the reason why I was using petrol is that you can't get camping gas in Russia. So
right.
Yeah, that's the main thing. It was my main concern going over there. I was kind of researching it a fair bit and spoke to people, and it was a case of you have to use petrol. But I learned in hindsight that I got the best quality petrol. Like over there, in Russia they've got a few different grades. I think you guys have that in America as well. Different grades of petroleum, gas.
Right. Yep.
So we don't have that in Ireland. We just got one type. But anyways, I got the best type, and apparently someone said to me afterwards that you actually should have gotten the worst one, because there's more additives in the better quality stuff, So yeah, they didn't burn very well, and then they ended up both of them ended up kind of not working at all, and I was swapping parts around and changing nozzles, and this was like day 2. So then I had to kind of make the decision to call my contact in Russia, who had helped me in transfers and stuff, and they were amazing. Tatiana at AB Tours, they were great. They went and got me 2 MSR Dragonfly stoves from a camping store locally to them, and they brought them to me, which because I was close to the shore, close to one of these little towns in the south, and so I picked up 2 new stoves, and they also brought 5 liters of paint thinner, just in case, because I wasn't sure whether the petrol that I was using was completely bunk and I was going to end up, it not working either. So here I am with 4 stoves, 5 liters of paint thinner, and 6 liters of petrol, and then I went on my merry way. But obviously I'd lost my unsupported status at that stage, which I didn't mind. I just wanted to keep going and complete the whole traverse of the lake. And I at that particular day I only managed 5 kilometers, because I had to basically wait for them to come to me, and then I had to make sure the stoves were working again. So that kind of went out the window a bit, but as I said, it didn't matter. I just wanted to keep moving, and I had to end up the MSR Dragonfly worked perfectly with the petrol for the rest of the trip, and then I kept going to heading north to the end of the lake, which took 17 days in the end.
This episode is sponsored by Aftershocks. They are headphones with bone-conducting technology. So they rest in front of your ears, not inside your ears like most headphones. And the benefit is they keep your ears free. I would have felt so much safer on my bike trips if I would have had these, but I'm on the bike for 12 hours. I'm not going to not listen to something. So I did put myself at risk a lot. And I would highly recommend something that allows you to keep your ears free and be able to listen to this show, or music if you choose that. But come on, you want to listen to this show. They have a 6-hour battery life, awesome audio quality, and you can get $50 off the Trex Air Adventure Bundle or the Trex Titanium Adventure Bundle at asp.aftershocks.com. And that is also in the show notes. This episode is also sponsored by CS Instant Coffee, 100% Arabica coffee with compostable packaging. And you can find them at csinstant.coffee and use adventure at checkout for 20% off.
Okay, so even after those delays and fighting with the stoves and waiting for a little bit of support, you still were pretty close to the 13 and a half day record that these guys had set.
Yeah, if you know, at the time, yeah, if a lot of things had gone right, I think definitely could have gone for it. At the top, it's funny, the fastest known time thing. It's I googled around, I looked at it, I really only found their their account of it online, and I saw a lot of Russians out using the lake, and I didn't. It's funny, it's one of those things I didn't at the time as well. I was wondering, is it maybe some Russians done it in 10 days? You just don't know. It's one of those things, so. I just said, look, I'll just keep going and see how I go. And, if I go faster and if I don't, it doesn't matter. I just wanted to try and finish it. And I actually was on track for doing around 14 days. But when you get to the north of the lake, there's no towns. It's kind of like there's nothing there. And I got snowed in. It snowed about 1.5 feet one night. And then it slowed me right down. So, there was days where I was covering up to 60 kilometers on the bare ice, but then when I got to this northern section, it snowed and it covered the ice with snow, and so I was wearing snowshoes, and I was feeling every pound of the sled behind me. It was dragging really heavy, big clumps of snow in it, and one day it took me the best part of 10 hours to do 10 kilometers. It was super slow, and I think that was probably the lowest point of the expedition, because I was on about day 14 at the time, and I was running out of food at that stage as well. I started to have to ration my food because I didn't know how long it was going to take me to get to the end. I was just kind of in no man's land. There was no car, like the Russians used the lake as an ice road and in sections, so that you can, even if there was a bit of snow, you could kind of, follow a car track. But where I was, there was nothing. So I was breaking trail myself, and, just plowing through kind of deep snow. And, it was really frustrating because the ice was there. It was down a few, half a foot, and I could just feel it. I was just, willing the wind to pick up, to blow it off
right.
Yeah, because it actually, that's what it would do. The winds there were incredibly strong. I've never experienced anything like it. Even haven't been to, Patagonia and Antarctica and places like that. I've never experienced winds like it in Baikal. It's just, very, very strong winds, and the whole lake itself is rimmed by mountains. You've got these, incredible peaks the whole way around it, and the wind just seems to, this Siberian wind that just comes down through the valleys, and it just whips around, and you don't know which way it's coming. It's coming one direction one minute and the other the next, and you think to yourself, oh, if I just get around this headland, I'll be sheltered. And you get around the headland, it's coming around the direction into your face, so
yeah, I'm sure the day is full of those kind of thoughts too, because you're out there just with your own thoughts. You're thinking, man, we sit here and battle this wind all day long, and you're willing it to do one thing and it does the other, and it's got to occupy you.
Yeah, it was funny. As I said there, there was days where I was like, it was so windy. I was really worried about setting up camp. And there was one day it was that windy that I had the sled was on the ice, and it was actually blowing around in front of me. So the sled was taking off, and then I was losing my grip on the ice. I had a pair of sort of not sort of hiking boots, sort of Hoka 1-1 trail running shoes, and I had ice spikes screwed into the bottom, and I was losing my grip on the ice because of the wind, and then the sled was getting blown off ahead of me and it's just taken off on the ice. And I had for my tent, I had ice screws. They're literally the most expensive tent pegs in the world. Because
you're right.
Yeah, I had to buy 12 of these to use as tent pegs. I had to screw them in. But I had an ice screw at the ready, because I actually thought that I would have to, put an ice screw into the ice and hook myself and sled into it at one stage, because just to, stop myself getting blown away on the ice. So it was interesting, and yeah, the first time I think I think it was day 5 when I was on the ice, and the ice actually creaks and groans a lot, and there's a lot of movement in the ice because you've got this very, very long finger of a lake, but it's not that wide. I think it's 80 kilometers wide. And then there's a lot of like pressure ridges, and you've got like this sort of jumble ice that's had frozen early in the season, then it thawed out and refroze. So there's big sections where you actually have to climb over chunks of ice, and I think someone told me it was on a fault line as well. So there's all this creaking, groaning, and cracking going on all the time. Even there was days when I was walking along and there's like little fissure cracks shooting out from my feet. So it was quite unnerving to begin with. But the ice is 3 meters thick, so there was nothing going to happen. But it was quite scary. So I said I'd camp off the ice one night. So I went onto the shore, this nice little kind of beach, and set up camp there. But obviously I wasn't using the ice screws there. I just had my tent pegs. But the powder, the snow there is probably the same as the type you get in Colorado, that real dry, light powder. So I wasn't getting a lot of purchase with my tent pegs in the snow. But it was a lovely evening at the time. It was a lovely sunset. I said, okay, I won't worry too much about it. But I woke at 2:00 in the morning, and the tent was getting blown all over the place. The winds had picked up, something crazy, over 100 kilometers an hour. I could just hear the trees just around me, just, making this insane noise. And then I was spent the rest of the night awake and, hoping the tent would hold. And luckily it did. And the only reason the tent did hold is because, as if you're doing any winter camping, you don't get out of the tent to go to the toilet. I'd been peeing in a pee bottle, and then I'd been emptying the pee bottle out of the tent, just reaching out, and I poured it onto the tent peg around the snow on the outside, and it's like formed this little ice block.
Froze it in there for you. That's a good idea,
yeah.
Actually.
So I was that was lucky, because that was the section on the outside where the vestibule was, where the wind was coming from, and otherwise it really wanted to lift it off from there. So that was my first encounter with the wind early on, and after that I stayed on the ice. I didn't care about the creaking and groaning, because you're with 12 ice screws, it's going to take a lot to get to rip those out.
Yeah, at least you stay put.
Yeah.
Well, hey, if you in that kind of wind, you stayed in your tent, you could have just rode the tent all the way to the end. That would have been a quicker way to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I was trying. I was a section where I was actually trying to. I was jumping onto the sled and trying to ride the sled in the wind, but I wasn't getting too far.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your upcoming stuff. You had alluded to a trip you're planning to row the Atlantic solo. These trips always intrigue me. We interviewed a man named Peter Bray back in September, I think it was. And he's from Cornwall, England, and had done it. And I was just really intrigued with the mental stability or the mental mindset it takes to be out in the middle of the ocean by yourself for those kind of periods. So tell us about the plans to do this, why, and what's the reason, what's the purpose, and what do you intend to accomplish?
Yeah, I got the idea last year. I get a lot of the ideas for my trips when I'm in the chamber at work. I think it's the kind of place where it's not the best place in the world to be. And
right. Too many strange ideas come about.
Yeah, and I suppose I always trying to think up stuff to do. So yeah, I was reading a book, and the guy was talking about rowing the Atlantic. He rowed in a pair, and he spoke about how the middle of the night when he was rowing across in the middle of the Atlantic, and there was like the phosphorescent plankton that is like glowing, and it was, as he took each stroke with the oars, there was like swirls of this phosphorescent plankton glowing in the water, and the Milky Way is above him, and I just thought I'm into that. I would like to experience that, and I suppose as soon as I have the spark of idea, then I'm on board. That was kind of, it's always been the way with any of the adventures. The idea is just as soon as I get that initial click, I just think, yeah, I could probably do that, or maybe I could go for that. And, I just, from there, I just did a bit more research and, thought I'm going to go for it. And then I found out about the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge, which is the race that I'm doing. It's a ocean rowing race from the Canary Islands off Morocco to Antigua in the Caribbean, and it's held every year in December. And there's solo, pairs, and fours, so there's about 20-25 crews usually entered. And yeah, I committed to it, not long after finishing that book. Didn't really know what I was doing, but I, decided to go for it anyway. And trying to just work it all out now in the process of training for it. I've got my boat. I've got a ocean rowing boat. I'm actually picking it up in a couple of weeks. 2 weeks. Yeah. I'll bring that back to Ireland and start training that for the rest of the year, and then hopefully I'll be heading off across the Atlantic in December.
Wow, that's going to be cool. Well, I'll definitely follow along and see how you do with that, because like I said, I just looking on Instagram and checking out some of the things that you're up to is it's kind of mind-boggling. We all have our a little adventure thing that we like to do, but you seem to be running the gamut of the various adventures. You don't seem like you're going to stop anytime soon, but that's cool. I mean, being that where you came from with the alcohol and drug dependency, and turning it into a lifestyle like this is, like I said, is truly inspiring. It's I applaud you for that.
Thanks.
And sticking with it.
Thanks, Travis.
Right on. All right. So speaking of Instagram, let's tell listeners where it is they can go see what you're up to. So Instagram, what's your address there?
It's Solo Gav, but Solo is SOULOGAV. And you can follow me on Instagram, and also the same on Twitter, and facebook.com/Solo Gav again. Yeah. I mean, I'm at the moment just getting into the training and stuff, and I'm still posting some photos from Lake Baikal, and there's plenty of stuff on there. So go check it out, and hopefully I'm getting a website together at the moment as well. So yeah, I'm actually gonna pursue the adventurer job title maybe. I've listened to enough podcasts and read a few books at this stage, and gonna definitely try and do a bit more of this and see if I'm doing a bit of public speaking at the moment as well. I'm really enjoying that. I've been doing some school talks for kids, which is super fun. I've been doing where I go in and just do a slideshow, and with sort of 12-year-olds, and they're really into it. I've got a ton of great photos from all the different places I've been. Lots of wildlife shots and polar bears in the Arctic and stuff like that. So the kids are really enjoying that and do that in Galway. And I want to try and I'm going to bring the boat back and show them once I get that sorted. Then hopefully when I get out on the Atlantic, I want to try and do like a conference call or Skype call from there. Hopefully if I can get a decent connection, try and bring the adventure into the classroom,
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that's kind of a good thing at the moment. I'm really enjoying, just doing my best to, inspire or, be some sort of role model to younger kids in Ireland, because, Ireland's, it's becoming a very progressive country, and, adventure and outdoor activities wouldn't have been something that people would have done, but it's really starting to happen now, with, people get out into the mountains here, and, surfing and, all the adventure sports. So, just trying to, cause we have a great history of, hanging out in the pub and drinking alcohol, and, don't get me wrong, people can enjoy that, sensibly. But, it's good to, inspire people and kids to, get out and, do more stuff that, like I'm doing,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're the perfect guy for it. I mean, I can't say that I've ever run across a person who, will on their day job be 700 feet below sea level and then find themselves a week later, on holiday 22,000 feet above sea level. That's That's a pretty big range for somebody to exist in as a human being. So you're definitely in a small minority there.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I'd never thought of that. I'm probably not sure how many people have been deepest and been at the highest. I have to get up Everest yet, and yeah, maybe some sort of claim there, get there. You know.
Well, I have no idea, no doubt I will see you see reports of you being up there. That's for sure.
Yeah.
All right, Gavin. Well, man, thanks so much for coming on. I mean, I could make this a 3-part episode, no doubt, because there's a million questions I still like to ask you. But we'll hold it here for now, and maybe in the future we'll get you back on and have you fill us in on this open ocean rowing that you're going to do. And I'm sure by that time you'll have done plenty of other things that we can talk about.
Absolutely, yeah. Definitely love to get back on, and yeah, hopefully get some cool stories from being out in the Atlantic.
Very cool, very cool. Well, keep it up, be safe, and I will definitely follow along and see where you're at.
Right on. Cheers, Travis. Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good one, Gavin.
First of all, thank you so much for listening to the episode. Secondly, if you would like to get in touch, you can leave us a voicemail at 812-MAIL-POD. You can also send us an email, info@adventuresportspodcast.com. Get a hold of us on Facebook, Instagram. Contact us on the website. There's just 1,000 ways to do it. If you know somebody that would make a good guest for the show, whether it's you or somebody you know with a really cool story or background or does an interesting sport, get in touch. We'd love to have them on. Also, if you'd like to be a patron, aka a supporter of the show, patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. You can sign up for $5 a month. And lastly, thank you to our sponsors whose messages follow right now. Go to athleticbrewing.com and use the code ADVENTURE at checkout to save 15% off the best tasting and lowest calorie non-alcoholic beer you're ever going to try. Don't forget to save $50 off a headset bundle at asp.aftershocks.com. It's my new favorite way to listen to music and podcasts and stay safe while I run and ride my bike. After all this adventure talk, if you need to go to a place and buy some gear and talk to an expert, go to backpacktribe.com. They can help you choose the right gear, and they have the expertise and know-how with each piece of equipment. Now get out there and do something crazy.